Hello, and welcome to Nailing It Down, and we continue our expansion of literary and linguistic interpretative concerns from our earlier series on hermeneutics to talk about another concept from Mikhail Bakhtin. For those of you who want to know the context for Bakhtin as a whole, I would check out my video on heteroglossia and polyphony. Today, we're going to talk about the theory of Chronotope, or the analytical tool of Chronotope. And it is a term coined by Bakhtin, derived from the obvious Greek roots, chronos and topos, chronos being time and topos being space, and it can literally be translated as time-space. This was first developed by Bakhtin in his 1937 essay, Forms of Time and the Chronotope in the Novel, which is available in this book, The Dialogic Imagination, edited by Michael Holquist and translated by Caryl Emerson and Michael Holquist. Today, I'll be relying on this as well as Emerson and Munson's biography, intellectual biography of Bakhtin, Mikhail Bakhtin, The Creation of Prosaics, which, doesn't have the greatest title in the world, but just so you know my sources, you can also find my sources in the show notes. All right, so let's go to the first instance of the Chronotope. I'm going to say this with a warning, though. Bakhtin is often reduced to, as Emerson and Munson put it in their biography, a bunch of neologisms that are used in essays and by cultural and linguistic anthropologists, etc. Now, I think these concepts are super helpful because what they push back against, and in this case, this is a push back against neo-Kantianism. But we should always remember that these were used and employed in a broad philosophical literary project of which Bakhtin was engaged in through the course of his life, and they are much broader than a few concepts that we can use cool words for. So let's deal with that in the future. But this is from the essay, The Form of Time and the Chronotope of the Novel. Like I said, written in 1937. A particularly rough time for Bakhtin. See the prior episode for that information. Long quote from the essay. We will give the name chronotope, literally time-space, to the intrinsic connectedness of temporal and spatial relations that are artistically expressed in literature. The term time-space is employed in mathematics and was introduced as part of Einstein's theory of relativity. The special meaning it has in relativity theory is not important for our purposes. We are borrowing it for literary criticism, almost as a metaphor, almost but not entirely. Asterisk. I love that Bakhtin realizes the thin line between a concept and a metaphor that many people do not get. What counts for us is the fact that it expresses the inseparability of time and space, time as the fourth dimension of space. We understand the chronotope as a formally constitutive category of literature. We will not deal with the chronotope in other areas of culture. In the literary artistic chronotope, spatial and temporal indicators are fused into one carefully thought out concrete whole. Time, as it were, thickens, takes on flesh, becomes artistically visible. Likewise, space becomes charged and responsive to the moment of time, plot, and history. The intersection of axes and the fusion of indicators characterizes the artistic chronotope. Chronotope in literature has an artistic generic significance, or generic. It can be said that it is precisely the chronotope that defines genre and generic distinctions. For in literature, the primary category in which a chronotope is time. Chronotope as formally constituted category determines to a significant degree the image of man in literature as well. The image of man is always intrinsically chronotopic. For Bakhtin and for us, it means the image of man is always related to the specific context, the historical instantiation, and the social world, which gave that utterance meaning. Now, Bakhtin does limit himself to literature here, but he's pushing back against Kant. Kant saw time and space as transcendental preconditions for experience. They are beyond concrete reality. Whereas Bakhtin regards time and space as forms of the most immediate reality. They are your context. Your context is your real. It is your world in which every thought and utterance is embodied. They are not mere mathematical abstractions, but have complete and qualitatively rich and variable form. You are different from moment to moment, and moment to moment, your utterances are in the context of that difference and in the context of their social world. Remember what we said about polyphony and heteroglossia. You say things you don't mean to say, partly because there's parts of you that have voices that are coming out in the language, but partly because the history of the language comes through when you use it, as well as future changes in the language. So, in some ways, you are in no control of the social context of which you speak. And similarly, in the chronotope, to understand the chronotope is to understand the specific time and space being appealed to, both in the author's context, but also in the context of the genre constraints of the novel, the difference between the ethic and the novel, etc. Bakhtin is concerned here about literary genres, but he's applying this across the board. Different structures or orders of the universe cannot be subsumed to operate within the same chronotope. All right. So we have to ask ourselves, when we're dealing with an utterance or a statement, what is its chronotypic limitations, or what is its time-space context, right? What is specific to when this was said versus how we are interpreting it now in a different chronotopic context. Now, this is a very simple concept, and it is an analogy to time, space, and science, time as a fourth dimension of space, a measurement of space that we experience but cannot see, since our sight is always instantiated in a specific moment in time. So this metaphor from Einstein's theory of relativity and from early 20th century physics becomes really useful for how you deal with the richness of an utterance, and it's useful for dealing with an utterance's social discourse, both in the time that it was mentioned and the time projected in the genre of what is being said itself, and in our own interpretive lens today, which has a different chronotopic set of assumptions. This is important for understanding why context cannot be treated as mere abstractions. And in fact, and this way, Bakhtin is still kind of dealing with Kant. The fullness of a chronotypic utterance can only be experienced in that time space, because there's other context being brought in all other time spaces of utterances. All right, now that may sound strange to you, but it is a way of saying, even if you ask the author what they meant in a particular moment in time, that moment in time has passed, and they are themselves imposing new context onto their own work. There is no transcendentalness to this. In that sense, it is anti-Kantian, but it does respect that the thing in itself is largely not completely knowable. Now, you might say, well, this is mostly about literature. And the concept of chronotope, even though it comes from Einstein's physics, is mostly about literary studies. But linguistic anthropologists have also used chronotopes to deal with the way, say, indigenous languages are linked with specific places and have specific place context. And that means that utterances there are culturally chronotopic. So there is that. We can also talk about nostalgia, hauntology, tourism as like misrecognitions of a chronotopia. So tourism is like a romanticized chronotopia. It's highly curated. So you're consuming the specific time place of the experience and you're paying for that. But you can also think about like nostalgia is trying to invoke a specific chronotope outside of its original utterance, which you can never do. So it always appears ontologically as a ghost. You can see how this concept becomes useful for dealing with the way we approach ideas from the past, but recontextualize them often poorly. So they are not completely embodied, remembered, or understood. I hope that helps you. We're going to be going back to our critique of the Goethe program stuff for a little while, but we'll be coming back to Bakhtin. He's crucial to a book I am writing. There's some essays I think that will be on him in my book From Marktopia the Barbarism, applying his thought to what did and did not happen from 2008 to 2022. Because why not throw my opinion in essay form on the list of millennial left autopsies, although I think what I'm going to be doing is not so much just limiting myself to the millennial left, but limiting myself to the way the history of the left came back in this time period. History was not restarted, but invoked as a fugue state. Anyway, that's my thesis. We'll come back to that in my essays that I will be writing. But now that you know why I'm going through Bakhtin, is to explain these concepts because I'm going to be using them. And I hope maybe they're useful for you. All right. Like and subscribe. Have a great day. And protect your peace.